so from the admissions made by the tortured knights, the story was fabricated that they had worshipped an idol instead of Christ, an idol of a human head with luminous eyes, that on their admittance to the order they were subjected to repulsive sexual procedures of the vilest nature, that they did not conduct the transubstantiation in the right way, that they committed the worst sexual offenses, that even on their admittance to the order they forswore the mystery of Golgotha. The catechizing had been so well organized that even the Grand Master of the order had been tortured into making these subconscious avowals. It is one of the saddest chapters of human history, but one that can only be understood if one sees clearly that behind the veil of what is related by history stand active forces, and that human life is truly a battlefield. Because of lack of time, I will omit all that might be said further on this subject, but it would be easy to show how there is every ostensible reason for condemning the Knights Templar. Many stood by their avowals, many fled. The majority were condemned and, as stated, even the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was forced under torture to speak in the way described. Thus it came about that Philip the Fair, Philip IV of France, was able to succeed in convincing his vassal, Pope Clement V, it was not difficult, that the knights had committed the most shameful crimes, that they were the most unchristian heretics. All this the Pope sanctioned with his benediction, and the Order of the Templar was dissolved. 54 knights, including Jacques de Molay, were burned at the stake. Shortly afterward in other European countries, in England, Spain, then right into Central Europe and Italy, action was also taken against them. Thus we see how the interpretation of the mystery of Golgotha and its influence penetrated into the midst of European evolution through the Order of the Templar. In a deeper sense, however, these things must be looked upon as determined by a certain necessity. Humanity was not yet ripe to receive the impulse of wisdom, beauty, and strength in the way the knights desired. Besides, it was determined on grounds we have yet to learn, grounds that lie in the whole spiritual development of Europe, that the spiritual world was not to be attained in the way in which the Templars entered it. It would have been gained too quickly, which is the Luciferic way. We actually behold here a most important twofold attack of the forces of Lucifer and Ahriman, Lucifer urging the knights on, driving them into their misfortune, and Ahriman working actively through the inspiration of Philip the Fair. We see here a significant twofold attack effected in world history. But what lived and worked in the Knights Templar could not be eradicated. Spiritual life cannot be rooted out, it lives and works on further. With the Knights, notably with the 54 who had been burned at the stake through the agency of Philip, many a soul was certainly drawn up into the spiritual world who would still have done much work on the earth in the spirit of the Templar Order, and who would also have attracted pupils to work in the same spirit. But it had to turn out differently. In the spiritual world, these souls lived through those experiences they had undergone in the most terrible agonies that were brought about under the influence of the visionary avowals extorted through torture. Their impulses, which now, between their death and their next birth, go out to souls who have since descended, and also to souls who are still above awaiting incarnation, must be metamorphosed from the character of the activity of the physical earthly world into spiritual activity. What now came from the souls of the knights, who had been murdered in this pitiful way and who before their death by burning had to undergo the most frightful experience a man can suffer, was to become for many others a principle of inspiration. Powerful impulses were to flow down into humanity. We can prove this in the case of many human souls. Today, however, we will keep more to the sphere of knowledge and intellect as we have done also in the other examples given in recent days. Inspiration from the cosmic knowledge of the Knights Templar, this was always given. The fact that ultimately people came to look on the Templars as heretics after they had been burned to death is not to be wondered at, nor is it to be wondered at that people also believed they had committed all sorts of infamous crimes. Had someone been pleased to condemn as specially heretical the Devil's Act, which has just been presented here, * in which Mephistopheles, the lemurs and the thick and thin devils appear, perhaps, I do not know, countless persons in the nation would also look on that as something heretical. The methods of Philip the Fair are, however, no longer employed in the present rather more lamentable times. The cosmic wisdom that these knights possessed has entered many souls. One could cite many examples of how the inspiration of the Knights Templar had been drawn into souls. I will read you a passage from the poem, Ahasver, by Julius Mosen, which appeared in 1838. As you can read in the lecture cycles, I have often referred to Julius Mosen, the author of the profound poem, Ritterwan, Night Chimera. In the very first canto of the third section of Ahasver, Mosen leads his hero to those parts of the earth where, in Ceylon and the neighboring islands, the region is to be sought that we describe in the cosmology of our spiritual science as the approximate locale of Lemurian evolution. This region of the earth is distinguished in a special way. You know that the magnetic North Pole is located at a different point from that of the geographic North Pole. Magnetic needles everywhere point toward the magnetic North Pole, and one can draw magnetic meridians that meet at this point. Up in North America, where the magnetic North Pole lies, these magnetic meridians go round the Earth in straight lines. Remarkably, however, in the Lemurian region the magnetic meridians become sinuous serpentine lines. The magnetic forces are twisted into a serpentine form in this region. People notice these things far too little today. One who sees the living Earth, however, knows that magnetism is like a force vivifying the Earth. In the north it goes straight, and in the region of Old Lemuria it goes in a tortuous winding line. Just think how profoundly Julius Mosen speaks as he sends his Ahasver toward this region in the first canto of the third epic. It is divided in epics of the poem. In line direct and straight from southern pole takes the magnetic line its chosen course, when suddenly it twines in serpent curve there before India and its neighbor isles, before the dungeon where in deepest woe sits the eternal mother ever bound. In circle form the line drew back its length, and twining swift and secret on itself with a single plunge in swirling vortex fell. There the Great Spirit in a first embrace held the poor spouse, and from their ardent fire sprang the earth demons instantly to life. When thus the first creation came to naught, the nameless spirit in his wrath stamped down the bridal couch beneath the sea. So it goes on. We see inspiration emerge with wonderfully intuitive knowledge. The wisdom lives on that could only enter the world amid sufferings, tortures, persecutions, and the most frightful offenses. Nevertheless, it lives on in spiritualized form. When we seek the most beautiful spiritualizations of this wisdom that has entered the development of Europe, as we have described, then we find one precisely in all that would work and live in the powerful imaginations of Goethe. Goethe knew the secret of the Templars. Not without purpose has he used gold as he has done in his fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily, in which he made the snake consume the gold, and then sacrifice itself. By this deed the gold is wrested from the powers with which Goethe truly knew it must not be allowed to remain. Gold, naturally everything is also meant here of which gold is a real symbol. Read once more Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily and try to feel how Goethe knew the secret of gold, how, through the way in which he lets gold flow through the fairy tale, he is looking back into earlier times. May I perhaps add here the personal confession that when for the first time in the 80s of the last century, I faced the question of the gold in Goethe's fairy tale, the meaning of the story emerged for me through the development of the gold in it. Through the way in which Goethe lets gold flow through this fairy tale, he shows how he looks back into the time in which wisdom, for which gold also stands, hence, the golden king of wisdom, was exposed to such persecutions as those described. Now, he sought to show past, present, and future. Goethe saw instinctively into the future of Eastern European civilization. He could see how unjustifiable is the way in which the problem of sin and death work there. If we wish to designate, not quite inappropriately perhaps, the nationality of the man who is then led to the temple and the beautiful lily, who appears at first as without vigor, as if crippled, then, from what we have had to say recently about the culture of the East and of Russia, you will not consider it unreasonable to deem this man to be a Russian. In so doing, you will almost certainly follow the line of Goethe's instinct. The secret of European evolution in the fifth post-Atlantean epoch lies concealed within this fairy tale, just as truly as Goethe was able to conceal it in his Faust, especially in the second part, as we know from his own statement. It is clearly to be seen in Goethe. We have already shown it in various respects, later it can be shown in others, that he begins to regard the world and to feel himself in it, in accord with the fundamental demand of the fifth post-Atlantean epoch. In Goethe we have a true continuation of the life of the Knights Templar but, as I have said, in a spiritualized way. This Goetheanism, however, will only be able to enter slowly and gradually into human understanding. I have already shown in certain respects how the impulse for everything of a spiritually scientific nature lies in Goetheanism. All of spiritual science can be developed from Goethe. I have shown in a public lecture, Berlin, April 15, 1916, that I gave a short time ago how the first elementary scientific foundation for the doctrine of reincarnation, of repeated earth lives, lies in Goethe's doctrine of metamorphosis. He begins the teaching of metamorphosis by showing how the leaf changes into the blossom, how an organ appears in different forms. When one follows this through with penetration, there lies implicit in it what I have often explained here, that is, the head of man is the transformed body, and the rest of the body is a human head still to be transformed. Here is metamorphosis in the ultimate degree, which for science will develop into a direct knowledge of reincarnation, of repeated earthly lives. But Goethe is still but little understood. He must first become familiar in the cultural life of humanity. Not only centuries but millenniums will be needed in order to unravel what lies in Goethe.